If you enjoy the information in this video, or the video itself, please consider giving it a like and the channel a possible subscribe. Thank you.
Cimetière du Vieux Château in France. One can find the burial ground of the Reverend William Webb Ellis. This is the gentleman that is credited for creating and crafting the game of rugby. From a single ephemeral exploit of disdain and disobedience, this folklore that is attributed to this man is most certainly not true. In fact, it was an objective fact at the time that it was an incorrect version of history. The authorities, which ran the game, went with it anyway. Why? Well, that's an essay, a novel, an assignment for another day and another time. In the present, the aim is more interested in the diamond facts of the matter. Rather than some compact tale printed in rugby school's newspaper, The Meteor, in the late Victorian era by one Matthew Bloxham. So if this fable is a work of certain fiction, how did the sport begin? To elucidate the archaic accounts of this chronicle, one has to be taken back to the generations when Queen Elizabeth's backside placed a super-incumbent force on the throne of the country of the origin, England. Association football did not exist. The pastime of rugby union could not be found, which of course meant the hobby of rugby league. The game that branched off from rugby union was also not present in the land. In sporting terms, this was the era of folk football. This designated title exists in order to differentiate it from the modern-day association football game. The reason for this is that there is a need to. These folk football functions had a lot more quantities that could be classed as chaotic, had much greater rudimentary components when pre-formed, and consisted with far further elements of embryonic existence to their nature. There was no book scripted by an organized authoritative body that dictated the way the game should and should not be played. These events did not exist like the current ball games of the present, which operate under a strict code of rules or laws in the case of rugby union. Back in this Tudor period, the rules of these games, these pursuits, would be agreed the moments before the engagement, both sides bantering back and forth until the handshake sealed the deal. This made these pastimes change, not only from town to town, and village to village, and hamlet to hamlet, which they did. They would also distinguish from one another from one year to the succeeding. Sometimes, and in particular places, they would have been able to physically seize the ball in a grip and propelled themselves while holding it, while in other times and in different locations, touching the ball was prohibited. The number of participants would have fluxed from season to season and from dwelling to dwelling. Operating during this epoch was also as distant from the present as the rules of engagement. Rather than being played from week to week and by team from one location against a squad or a company from another spot, they would have been utilized only on select days such as Boxing Day and Shrove Tuesday by peasants from the same abode. Chronicles from Pembrokeshire cast a description of one of these games in the stone tablet of time, stating,
"You shall see 100 or 60 clustered together as bees when they swarm are knit together, the ball being in the midst of them, which the other parties seek to open or undo by heaving or pulling."
John Stowe, in his famous survey, rather than talking about the rules of these acrobatic affairs and the activities, writes elucidating the caliber of individual that actually pursued these pastimes, stating how the lower orders of society in Elizabethan England were the ones to receive entertainment from these exercises. By the early 1800s, 1801 to be precise, Joseph Strutt, the philanthropist who would later on create the first public park in England, being Derby Arboretum, commissioned a survey of his own that reiterated Stowe's earlier poll, stating,
"Formerly much in vogue among the common people of England."
This, though, was all about to change, as well as the United Kingdom itself, and later the world. Flashing back to the Great Plague, the conclusion to the chaotic consequences to this historical pandemic decreased the workforce of the country drastically. A unique situation, the peasants, the poor folk, the sediment of society of these lands, could now demand a higher price for their labor. The wages that they received during these times were so high that they were now able to obtain luxurious garments of colors such as blue, crimson, and royal purple, before only accessible to higher orders of society. The ramifications got so exorbitant that landlords were forced to toil the turf of their territory themselves. Necessity is the mother of invention. This need to create labor-saving systems was now essential in the eyes of the upper order. These new ideas of graph reducing and streamlining creations would have a knock-on effect known as the Industrial Revolution. In economics, there is never just one ripple when such a big change has happened, such as this compendium of contrivances that had been interjected into the market. Rather, there is an environmental undulation that will occur. One of these happened due to the sudden raising of grand edifices that occurred in this era. These monolithic structures increased the demand of the material of limestone, causing a problem. It had an important use in the feudal period. This material is not only a substance for building and crafting. Colossal dwellings of labor-like were erected during these times, or gigantic, awe-inspiring works of art, such as the Colosseum. It also is used to neutralize the soil acidity, making the agricultural production more fertile. As demand increased, obvious economic outcomes raised the price, forcing the landlords to cut back on its application. The peasants, the lower order of society, then had to flee the ailing territory, as the land, which was once prolific and fruitful, was now producing a fraction of the crops that it was in yesteryear. Where would these peasants go? What labor would replace their previous, now dying toil? The same cities which had killed their trade would receive these inhabitants, banished or marshalled from their feudal pre-existence, no longer manning the fields of England. Rather, their capabilities were placed in the limestone monolithic architecture that had protruded out of the land in recent years. These structures that accommodated the industries, which was now the powerhouse of the British Empire. As the lower orders filled the increasing towns and cities, the middle classes fled these abodes, not wanting to be adjacent to the ragtag members of society. They retreated to the villages that the rabble had left, completely switching the demographics of who and whom lived where. The lack of space in these new environments for the working class to pursue the passion of football, and also due to the frowning that such activities in these places had now. The working class stopped participating in these contests. The Highway Act of 1835 completely banned these from happening, even if they wanted to perform them. The creation of the police force in the previous years, in 1829 to be precise, allowed this decree to be forced, making it a strictly forbidden practice. If one, or a group, disobeyed this law, the government foot soldiers could collect the topmost penalty of 40 shillings. Residents of Derby found this out the hard way. One citizen of this city went on record and stated,
"It is all disappointment, no sports and no football. This is the way they always treat poor folk."
Folks in this city did rebel against this law and organised the match on Shrove Tuesday, years after this comment was made. They found out the authorities were not bluffing. The Riot Act was read out, and the troops were brought in to enforce this law. Football for the working class was dead. In the world of the middle class in the more rural parts of the country that they now resided in, were also having a crisis of identity. This crisis of identity bulged from juvenile males in the private schools that they were homing their crafts in. Instantaneous acts of rebellion regularly occurred during these times. Movements of mischief may be putting it lightly. The term riots would be more fitting coming from these future leaders of society. Just before the turn of the 19th century, in 1797, the School of Rugby would record a riot. The magnitude of this tomfoolery was of such a high degree that soldiers had to turn up to this institution, drawing out their swords while reading the Riot Act to get them to decrease this disturbance. During this time, between 1768 to 1832, Dunning and Sheard listed 21 public schools that exhibited similar skullduggery. Rugby School would have another one of these acts of chicanery, or crass, in 1822, which led to expulsions. The old, the more elderly, generations of the ruling class needed some sort of mechanism to vaporize the mischievous edge that was rising from the young. The answer to that was football. With this, not only did the demographics of who lived where change, but also the sector of the population who played football was replaced. A complete metamorphosis of society had taken place. Even though this altering of the population's associations had occurred, the way the games were played hadn't. Still, the rules were agreed before the match, often passed by word of mouth, the exact same way the poor folk of yesteryear had done before selected calendar dates. This continuation of the rudimentary approach still could not contain the sport from evolving. By the 1840s, the H-shaped posts, the symbol of the sport of rugby today, were introduced. Kicking the ball over them was the scoring mechanism known as a goal. Later on, getting the newly shaped oval ball over the line produced a try-at goal, which the term try that is used in present times comes from. Other academic establishments took to the game, but still word of mouth was the modus operandi on how the rules were passed down. In the late part of the next decade, the sport would take another step, escaping out of the education scene, making a club outside of any school, being Liverpool. This may seem like an odd location, some 101 miles away from the school, which the sport bears its name. When one accounts that there is a direct train line going straight to the town of Rugby, to this mega city in the north, then all makes sense. The ex-pupils of this institution would make this their residence. Then they would play the game in their post-education years. Their first game was against Manchester, but this other northern city would not form a club. The next team to form was Black Health, who came into existence in the next year. Manchester would configure 2 years after the initial match outside of the edification environment. With this, the pastime propagated, with the hobby now touching school to school, town to town, and region to region. It became the utmost priority to the community that a conclusion, an agreement, was needed in order to codify the game. Is came such a concern that by 1863, a league of boarding schools and clubs formed together with the ambition of deciding a set of laws to which all clubs affiliated would have to conform to. On the 4th of December 1870, the Times newspaper printed the article which declared,
"Some code of rules should be adopted by all clubs who profess to play the rugby game."
The rugby world listened. 21 members trotted to Cockspur Street, and in this gathering they crafted, scribed and approved 59 laws which all teams and schools had to adhere to, thus creating the game of rugby football. Not by an ephemeral exploit of disdain and disobedience from a schoolboy, breaking the rules of the game in an act of tomfoolery, crass, or chicanery, but through an agreement, marshalled by the need placed onto it by the propagation of the pastime. That's how rugby began.